Today it's compost day and I'm making compost out of all this cover crop that I just harvested. Stay tuned to find out why and how coming up. Morning. Happy Friday. Thanks for watching the video today. I'm Diego, D-I-E-G-O. I'm a podcaster, I'm a YouTuber, I'm a gardener looking to get a little more scientific about my gardening and test a lot of the ideas out there. Today the idea I'm testing or employing is the idea of cold compost. What is cold compost? Usually when you hear people talk composting, they talk about hot composting, active composting, where you're trying to get the temperatures really high, above 130, above 140, above 150. They're adding a lot of nitrogen to the pile relative to the amount of carbon they're adding to the pile to try and get temperatures that high. They're also turning the pile frequently to keep introducing nitrogen into the center of the pile. They're also getting air into the pile by turning it. But there is one negative to that form of composting. You're creating a lot of off-gassing in the form of greenhouse gases when you try and create a hot pile. Because all those microbes that are breaking down the biomass are digesting and they're having a lot of byproducts. So you're getting a lot of carbon dioxide, methane leaving the pile. Now it's minor, and you could argue that I'm composting, like it's gonna offset the amount of greenhouse gas that I'm putting into the air. And I'm with you there. I'm not saying composting is any sort of significant source of greenhouse gas emissions. But what's in those greenhouse gases? CO2, methane. The carbon is going up into the sky. That's really not what you're after if you're trying to compost. You ever wonder why a pile goes from big to small when you compost? Well, one reason is, a lot of the airspace goes away. But another reason is you are literally burning off, or the microbes are digesting off or emitting off a lot of gases. So a lot of the nutrients in that big pile go up to the sky and the pile gets smaller as a result. If our goal is to put as many nutrients back into the soil as possible, then we don't want to do that. We don't want to have nutrients go up into the sky, so the plants have to go out and grab them again and put them back into the soil. We want to digest that biomass more slowly, so the nutrients in the pile stay in the pile and then go into the soil instead of into the sky. In his book, How to Grow More Vegetables, John Jevons talks about this. Many people advocate hot compost piles because they are said to kill weed seeds, disease organisms, and insect larvae. Hot composting piles cure at around 139 degrees Fahrenheit. At this temperature, probably only 25% of those are destroyed. It takes temperatures of about 178 degrees Fahrenheit to kill 100% of them. And this temperature burns off a lot of the organic matter that would become cured compost. So we are considering adopting a cooler pile approach. Such piles make greater use of coarse materials or the mature material input rather than metabolic carbon, and a little more soil and water. All this means some less nitrogen in the pile and a lower temperature. He goes on to say in the margin of that page, note, we are finding that cold compost piles, which are built with more carbon and can take up to 4 months or more to fully cure, may produce more cured carbon, or humus, and compost per unit of built carbon, possibly even double. This type of composting process is predominantly one of moldering rather than significant heat. If the test results prove consistent over time, the process should be essential to maintaining global sustainable soil fertility, since sufficient humus is the essential to making the fertility possible. You may wish to experiment with this. And experiment with this I will. My goal here is to try and slow down that digestive process of these microbes and make the compost slower. And at the end of the day, if it takes longer, but you're getting more effective humus or more total humus, then why not? I'm in no rush, so I'm going at the cold compost approach. When making cold compost, John suggests a few different ways to slow down the pile or decrease the temperature of the pile. Here are 5 of those ways. You can add slightly more carbonaceous material or less nitrogenous material. You can add more coarse materials and less fine ones. You can add slightly more soil when building the pile and slightly more water when building the pile. And you can go to a no-turn approach. Using that more mature carbon is one way to slow it down. That's why I added chicken bedding, which has a lot of wood shavings and other mulch that I've added under the coop to try to absorb that manure. Those are more mature forms of carbon, and they're going to be slower to break down. So now that we know what cold composting is and we know the theory behind it, let's see how I actually made it. So if you watched the video last week where I harvested cover crops, mustard to be exact, today I'm going to use those cover crops to make that compost. I'm going to be blending all 262 pounds of this mustard together with chicken bedding to make my cold compost. First ingredient, greens. Second ingredient, compost from a previous batch to help inoculate the pile. Third ingredient, chicken bedding from underneath my coop. Not worried about size, because we'll sort that out later. As you're watching me build this pile, you might notice that I'm not adding a ton of brown material. And you may be saying, Diego, John's saying you gotta add a lot of carbonaceous material, mature carbon to this pile to slow it down. Well, currently I don't have a lot of brown material. I don't have it stockpiled. I'm not trying to buy outside inputs and introduce them into the system. I'm simply working with what I have. And I have a lot of this chicken bedding, which has a lot of wood shavings, paper shredding, wood chip mulch in it, and I'm going to use that. So that's why it might not look like I'm adding a ton of browns to the pile. They're there, and it's what I had, so be forgiving. Going forward to try and kind of combat this problem, and this is a little bit of me kind of gazing into the future because I don't know what results I'm going to get from this pile. This is totally experimental. This is the first time I've ever done this. But thinking that I will need more mature forms of carbon, what I'm going to do going into the future is stockpile carbon. Things like corn stalks and maybe even some of this mustard. I'm going to let it dry out. Instead of trying to compost it right away, I'm going to let it get all brown. I'm going to let that carbon mature within those stems. And then I'm going to use that in future piles. So I'll have this stockpile of browns that I can mix with all these cover crop greens that I harvest and get a more optimal pile. Asterisk, I may not need a more optimum pile after doing this. The results will show and I'll go from there. But that's one thing I'm thinking up here that I'm going to use going forward. So for now, I'm going to roll with it. It is what it is. This isn't life or death. We're not launching a rocket for SpaceX here. Nobody's life is dependent on this. If the material to carbon to nitrogen ratio isn't perfect, who cares? It's fun. We're trying something. It'll eventually break down. Now, it might not be optimum in some of your eyes. You know who you are, and there's going to be criticizers of this. But, it's compost. Let's just do stuff and try things. Don't get so critical about it. Dude, you don't have enough brown in that pile. What are you talking about, bro? He's got enough brown. There's just not enough greens in that pile. Sir, you really need to turn that pile. If you don't, it's going to go anaerobic. I'm working with what I have. I'm doing an experiment. Let's let it ride. Live a little. Have some fun in the garden. It's okay. You don't have to be perfect all the time. At this point, I've built the pile as big as I can make it. I simply don't have any more green material to add to the pile. I'm not going for a specific size here, but I'm trying to shoot for at least a cubic meter in height, a cubic meter in depth, where the length could be any length. This pile could be a meter long or it could be 10 meters long. But I am going for that 1 meter height, 1 meter depth. I think mass does matter when you're making compost. It just needs enough material in it to start to get warm, to start to get the biology kicking. A smaller pile will break down, but it will take more time. Given that I've used up all my material at this point, I'm going to call this pile finished. In a perfect world, I would want to cover this pile with a layer of soil. I think that would help keep heat in. I think it would help keep moisture in. I think it would help keep smells in. and it would just bring another inoculation of biology to the pile. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of soil around to cover this pile. So I'm going to put some soil on top in the form of chicken bedding that's pretty well broken down, and I'm going to simulate soil using plastic or tarps. The tarps are going to keep water and moisture in and hopefully keep some of the smells out and keep some temperature in there. Given that I just did this, what are some of my thoughts? So based on my reading and based on my experience, one question I'm having is, am I going to need to turn this for whatever reason, or can it literally be 100% passive? Now I know if I leave it there long enough, it can be 100% passive, but I want to see if I can just let this ride, not touch it, and have it digest in a reasonable period of time. You know, if this was done in 2 months, 3 months here in California without turning, that'd be great. I may need to turn it once to kind of get the rougher outside material into the core, just to help break that stuff down, because I think the edges of the pile will digest slower. So we'll see. Another question I have is, how long is it going to take? Is it going to take a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months? Honestly, I don't know. There's a lot of green there. I have a feeling it's going to go pretty quick. I'm not sure I added enough brown. We'll see. I'll make a random guess while I'm recording this video. It is January 28th right now. Let's say that pile is done by March 28th, 2 months. So will it be done in 2 months or 60 days about? Will it smell? That's another big question. I'm not so much worried about the compost pile smelling from going anaerobic, although it could. I'm not sure this one will. I'm more worried about brassicas breaking down, because if you've ever smelled a field of rotting brassicas or had a cover crop of brassicas like mustard, when they start to rot, they stink. And I'm really curious of 262 pounds of mustard breaking down, how much it's going to stink. Fortunately, my house is downwind and there are some unfortunate neighbors upwind. So I have to be a little bit cautious of that, but not too much. Another thought, question, will I need to add water? 260 pounds of mustard carries a lot of water in it. I got it tarped. I'm not going to be lifting that tarp on a daily basis. So I think a lot of the water in the pile should stay in the pile. That tarp is going to capture any sort of transpiration and exudate and breathing out of any of those microbes when they breathe out water. So maybe that pile will stay moist enough just as it is. Am I going to have to add water? We'll see. And really at the end of the day, it's fun. It's an experiment and time is on my side. I'm not in a rush here. If it takes 2 months, if it takes 6 months, who cares? We're doing an experiment, we can wait. This is what gardening should be about. Dropping the dogmatism, dropping the, oh, this person said to do it this way, I'm only going to do it this way. Instead, do what you think is right. Try some different things. You can look at what other people said, like I'm going off John Jevons' research from his book. I'm not taking it as gospel, I'm using it as a guide, and then I'm testing it in my exact context to see what results I get, and I'm sharing them with you on YouTube. So if you want to emulate what I'm doing, go for it, but don't expect to get the same results as me. You're in a different climate, you have different materials, there's different weather, there's a lot of different factors that go in. You can't just carbon copy different ways of composting or doing anything in the garden and expect extremely similar results. You just might get close, but a lot of times close in gardening is actually very different. So go for it and stay tuned as I will update you on this pile into the future. I'm going for a video a week documenting my gardening journey here in 2020. If you want to learn more, look at some of the past videos that I've done already this year. But as always, I will be back next week with another new video. Until then, thanks for watching. Be nice, be thankful, and do the work. Ooh, boy, I already know it. People are just ready to tee off on this one because composting is one of those subjects that people love to be right on. You know, everybody's a composting expert, so this is going to generate a lot of feedback, I think.